What's up everyone, this is Marky2200 here, and following the success of the video where I discussed what in my opinion were 5 underrated starter cars in Need for Speed, today I'll be giving you my opinion on what are 5 overrated starter cars everyone picks in Need for Speed. Oh boy. The first one, the Chevy Cobalt from Most Wanted. Alright, before you grab your pitchforks and torches, let me just say, out of all of these cars, this one is by far the least overrated. The point I want to make here that it's not quite as good as people hype it to be. Obviously the Golf is the best starter car in Most Wanted, but let's say you don't have a save file of Underground 2 and you don't have that extra cash to grab that Golf. Which one do you pick then? Most people would say the Cobalt is then your best option. And well, to some extent, it is. Compared to the Punto, on most tracks, yeah, the Cobalt is actually quicker. But here's the thing, the Punto has way better handling. And on corner heavy tracks, and there are plenty of those in Most Wanted, I would say the Punto is genuinely better. Now in pursuits, sure, the Cobalt has the edge. The Punto's lightness is amazing for racing, but it can be a death sentence when you've got cops ramming you. That being said, the Cobalt is only about 200 kilograms heavier than the Punto, so it's not that much tougher during pursuits. So rather than one clearly being better than the other, it really comes down to personal preferences. Do you want a light, agile car that handles amazingly on technical tracks? Or do you want the slightly heavier Cobalt, which is more built for straight line speeds with a small pursuit advantage? Personally, I lean more towards the Punto, but honestly the Cobalt isn't just better or worse, it's just different. Number 2, the Subaru BRZ from Need for Speed 2015. When you check places like Reddit to see what the best starter car is in Need for Speed 2015, the most common answer you'll see is the BRZ. And honestly, I really can't say it is. See, in the early game, most of the tracks you'll do, not counting drift races, are highway runs or tracks that don't feature many tough turns. And that's simply to keep the early game less difficult, which is totally understandable. However, this means early on what you want is power. And the starter car with the most power is the Fox Body Mustang. I even tested them on what I would say is the least power-friendly early game track called In the Driver's Seat. And the Fox Body Mustang was about 3.5 seconds quicker than the Subaru BRZ. Now I do have to admit that the Fox Body does have some obvious flaws. For starters, its 5th gear is simply way too long. When you shift from 4th to 5th, the revs drop by about 2000 and you can clearly feel the car struggles when it does. Besides that, it definitely doesn't handle not nearly as nicely as the BRZ. But here's the thing, like I said, on those early game tracks where a lot of it is on highway and don't feature many tough turns, the lack of handling compared to the BRZ really doesn't matter. Later on when you get to medium difficulty races with tighter layouts and trickier turns, then yeah, you could argue the BRZ is better. But let me tell you a little secret. If it's handling you're after, don't bother with the BRZ, go for the Civic, and I am not joking. Think of it like this, in 2015 the Civic has the best handling but the weakest power, the Mustang has the worst handling but the most power, and the BRZ sits right in the middle. And since the early game is mostly about speed rather than handling given the nature of those tracks, I'd argue the Mustang is the best overall starter car in Need for Speed 2015. But all of them are still a very viable choice. Number 3, the Mazda RX-8 from Need for Speed Carbon. These days, I wouldn't say the RX-8 is the most popular starter car in Carbon. Emphasis on these days. Back in the day though, I remember a lot of people praising the RX-8 over the Camaro and the Brera because of its handling. And while yeah, the RX-8 does handle great, the problem is its acceleration. It's genuinely pathetic. In some races it can actually be the worst performing car in its entire tier. The Brera isn't much better, honestly it's a weak car too. And on certain tracks just as disappointing as the RX-8. But the difference is the Brera never got nearly the same praise as the RX-8 did. I'd say they're about on the same pace overall, with the RX-8 usually being the better one. But these days, if you Google best starter car in Need for Speed Carbon, most people will tell you it's the Camaro. And yeah, they are right. But you'll still see people here and there praising the RX-8. And the thing is, the Mazda 3, a tuner in the same tier, is simply flat out better. And that's why I would call the RX-8 overrated. Not as much as it used to be, but still overrated. Number 4, the Nissan 180SX from Need for Speed Heat. We are now really getting into cars that I would call genuinely overrated, much worse than you'd expect. In Carbon, the Camaro was clearly the favorite, but the RX-8 still had its praise here and there. With the 180SX in Heat though, it's a whole different story. You'll find plenty of people praising it. And while some argue the BMW M3 E30 is the better starter car, many still claim the 180SX is the best starter car in Heat. But here's the reality. As a starter car in Heat, the 180SX is actually the worst, and it's not even close. The Mustang and the BMW M3 E30 are fairly even on pace, with the Mustang generally being the slightly better one between those two. But when I tested all three on an early game track called Stardust, the results were quite shocking, to be honest. And that's because the 180SX was about 3 seconds per lap slower than a BMW and about 3.5 seconds slower per lap than the Mustang. The 180SX finished a massive 10 seconds behind the time of the Mustang. So yeah, I really can't defend the 180SX as the best starter car in any way, shape or form. The Mustang is the strongest overall, while the BMW is a great alternative if you prefer handling over power. And number 5, the Lotus Elise from Need for Speed Undercover. Okay, so if you've been following this channel for a little while, you already know I genuinely dislike the Elise in Undercover, and here is why. With the Cobalt and Most Wanted, it more or less came down to personal preference. With the BRZ in 2015, same thing, though it made more sense to pick the Fox body Mustang since the early game tracks favor speed over handling. With the RX-8 in Carbon, people still at least admitted it wasn't the best. And with the 180SX in Heat, plenty still preferred the BMW or the Mustang. But in Undercover, I feel like everyone and their grandmother recommends the Elise and only the Elise. And the thing is, it simply just isn't the best starter pink slip car. That title goes to the Ford Escort. You could even argue that the Elise is the third worst option, only ahead of the Golf and the Camaro, especially since Undercover has so many highway and straight line focused races. And that's exactly those type of races where the Elise really falls apart. Sure, the handling is great, but its acceleration and top speed are just flat out pathetic. When I tested all the cars for handling, acceleration and top speed, I even chose a super tight, corner heavy track for the lap time test to give the handling focused cars a massive advantage there. And yes, while the Elise did come on top handling wise, its speed and acceleration was so bad that it still finished behind the Escort, claiming only 6th place overall for tier 4 cars, while the Escort claimed 4th place overall. And when you remember that Undercover mostly throws high speed tracks at you, many of which feature a highway, rather than super tight corner heavy tracks similar to the ones that I used for the lap time test, I'd even argue the Elise might actually be the 3rd or 4th worst starter car in the game. And because I constantly see people on forums recommending the Elise over any other starter car in Undercover, when in reality it's actually seriously lacking, I'd honestly have to say that the Lotus Elise in Need for Speed Undercover is hands down the most overrated starter car in Need for Speed history. And those were my picks for the 5 most overrated starter cars everyone chooses in Need for Speed. Do you think I've missed one that deserves a spot on this list? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Other than that, don't forget to leave a like and please subscribe, because as of the time of this recording, I am only 80 subscribers away from reaching 10,000 subscribers. And I have something fun planned for the 10,000 subscribers special. So make sure to hit that subscribe button, it is greatly appreciated. Besides that, we also have an amazing Discord server, so make sure to join that if you're interested. Link of the server will be at the end screen and in the description down below. For now, this has been Marky2200. Thank you so much for watching, I hope to see you soon, but until then, take care.